My name is Tammy Moss-Chandler. I'm the Director of Health and Human Services, and I'm really thrilled to have everyone here today. I'm excited to have Supervisor Jarity from here in Fort Bragg do the opening remarks, and I just want to apologize in advance that Judge Ann Mormon isn't able to be with us here on the coast today. She did provide really inspiring opening remarks in Ukiah yesterday, but she's in court today, so not able to join us here today. So thank you, Supervisor Jarity, for opening us up this afternoon.
Thanks, Tammy, and thanks everyone for being here today. I know the reason why we're all here is that we're trying to help people who need help and also help their families sort of lift some of the burden that they're going through. So just some simple things. Back in June of 2015, the Board of Supervisors adopted a resolution joining the Stepping Up Initiative, and it commits the county to a diverse team of leaders and decision makers from multiple agencies committed to safely reducing the number of people with mental illness in the jails, collecting data and assessing individuals' needs in order to better identify adults with mental illness, and develop a plan with measurable outcomes. And a recent data from the Mendocino County Jail showed that of the 279 inmates, 30 of the 279 inmates have serious mental illness. 104 of the 279 were taking psychiatric medications, and average length of stay for those with mental illness was 156 days. 14 individuals are going through the competency to stand trial process, and 8 individuals are placed at state hospitals for incompetent to stand trial. The board is proud to have supported last year's Measure B and hope that we know those funds will make a difference. We look forward to participation in today's meeting, and I think we have some good speakers here, so thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Janine Miller, and I am the Behavioral Health Director for Mendocino County. First, I wanted to start with recognizing who our Stepping Up Committee consists of. So I'm going to go ahead and I will say their name and the organization they are affiliated with. First, I have Carrie Brown, who is with our Board of Supervisors. I have Carmel Angelo, who is the Mendocino County CEO. Judge Ann Mormon. Kim Turner, who is the court CEO. Tom Allman, who is our sheriff. Tim Pierce, the jail commander. Katie Ford with probation. Rebecca Craig, who is a consultant with the county, Beth Norman with the District Attorney's Office, Dr. Gary Pace, who is our Public Health Officer, Jan McGordy with our Behavioral Health Advisory Board, Donna Muschetti with the National Alliance on Mental Illness, Tim Schrader with Redwood Quality Management Company, Mary LeClure with the Public Defender's Office, Tammy Moss-Chandler, our HHSA Director, Brandy Smith of Substance Use Disorders Treatment, she's a manager there, and myself, the Behavioral Health Director. I was going to take a few minutes to just go over special mental health services in Mendocino County and give you guys kind of a brief overview of how special mental health services works within Mendocino County. The Department of Healthcare Services contracts with each county to provide a mental health plan. And so when we talk about special mental health, and we specifically talk about the county, we're talking what's considered a mental health plan. It's a carved out service, so it's carved out from other Medi-Cal benefits, and it's operated through the county as a county mental health plan, and we are operated through Department of Healthcare Services with a contract. How that works is it's sort of a good way to look at it is that special mental health services is like seeing a specialist. So you can go to your primary care and get your basic services met, but if you need a higher level of care, they usually refer you to a higher level, which would be a specialist. The county serves the serious mental illness. You'll hear that a lot of times when they talk about mental health in the Medi-Cal world, they talk about your diagnosis being either a mild, moderate, or severe. We provide services to what you would hear as the severe population. To meet the requirement for the severe population, you one, have to have Medi-Cal, you then have to have a diagnosis within the DSM-5 that qualifies, and you have to have a functional impairment that impacts your daily living. In Mendocino County, we also have a unique system in that we have an administrative service organization that we contract with, that then contracts with subcontractors to provide our outpatient services. That administrative service organization is called Redwood Quality Management Company, and then they contract out the services. So some of the services that Redwood Quality Management Company contracts out for is our crisis response, medication support services, our outpatient, our inpatient, and some residential services. Another piece within specialty mental health that you also will hear about is the Mental Health Services Act. That's a Prop 63 Mental Health Services Act. It's a 1% tax on those that make over $1 million. There are programs within Mental Health Services Act that we provide that are a little bit different than specialty mental health. They're not in the same requirement that Medi-Cal requires for specialty mental health, but those funding still have to be spent within regulations of Mental Health Services Act. And most of what we call MHSA for Mental Health Services Act is to promote recovery and wellness for adults and resiliency for our children and youth. I'm going to touch basically on some of our substance use disorders treatment. As we know, when we talk about stepping up, we're talking about mental health, but we're also talking about risk factors and substance use. Within Mendocino County, we've decided to focus for stepping up, not just on mental illness, but also to focus on substance use disorders treatment. So that's a piece that we're really looking at when we talk about stepping up. Within Mendocino County, the county provides substance use disorders treatment both in Willits, Fort Bragg, and Ukiah, with our biggest provider in the Ukiah area. And we offer a variety of services, assessments, treatment planning, crisis counseling, individual counseling, group services, and then obviously discharge planning. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the supplemental services that the county provides that aren't directly related to specialty mental health, as they may not be Medi-Cal billable, but they are supplemental services that we do provide. Some of it is funded through grants or through Mental Health Services Act. We have the Willow Terrace permanent housing that was just built, and we had a grand opening in April. That property is located in Ukiah on Gobi Street. It is 38 apartment units. One of those will be filled by a manager. The other 37 units will be provide housing to individuals who have a special mental health condition and are homeless or at risk for homelessness. So really exciting news for that. We also have a Round Valley Innovation Project, which is up in the Covelo area. We're working with Round Valley to provide an option for respite and crisis within that community, and it's being run through their providers locally. So very exciting there. We offer full service partnerships through our Mental Health Services Act. We have Laura's Law in this county, which we call assisted outpatient treatment. We just conducted 2 crisis intervention trainings to work with law enforcement and first responders on how to better de-escalate individuals when they're in a mental health crisis, and they are working with them. Mobile outreach and prevention services are throughout our county. They're mainly in 3 locations. We have 3 teams. We have a team in the North County, South Coast, and Anderson Valley. We also have Whole Person Care, which is a grant within the county that we are serving people that have mental health conditions with a grant opportunity that allows us to provide more services than Medi-Cal would allow us to provide and bill for. So it really expands the options for services for those that have a mental health condition. We have jail-based substance use disorder treatment services. In the last 2 years, we were able to add treatment, SUDT treatment within our county jail. They hadn't been there before, and we are now doing substance use disorders treatment within our county jail. We have a discharge planner that just started about a month and a half ago, and that individual is placed in our county jail and working to make sure that everyone who comes in is assessed to review to make sure that they don't have a mental health or substance use disorder. If they do, he'll be working with them to make sure that they get, upon discharge, that their Medi-Cal is active and that they are connected to services so that we hopefully reduce recidivism through that process. We have a behavioral health court. The behavioral health court is both on the coast and in Ukiah, so it does operate over here. And then we also have the main portion of the behavioral health court is in the Ukiah area. The other thing that we have is for some people who have heard of it, we have a misdemeanor competencies to stand trial program that operates out of the county jail. That is for those individuals who have been declared incompetent to stand trial. We have a program that works with them and keeps them local to restore them to competency and then get them back into our community. That is the county's obligation is for misdemeanor defendants. The state obligation is for felony defendants. And good news is we have just got approved by our Board of Supervisors to enter into a contract, the jail to enter into a contract with the Department of Healthcare Services to expand that to felony individuals who are incompetent to stand trial. Some things on the horizon for mental health and substance use, No Place Like Home. grant will allow us to get some additional dollars to build some additional housing for people that have especially mental health conditions. Drug Medi-Cal, we have the organizational delivery system, which is an expansion of Drug Medi-Cal services that will be coming our way soon. And then obviously Measure B is going to add some additional options, hopefully placement options in our community. Lastly, I just want to explain the mild to moderate. Within mild to moderate, there's always confusion on what does that look like. And the mild to moderate are usually served through if they have Medi-Cal, they're served through in Mendocino County, a third party called Beacon. And that's a contract the Partnership Health Plan of California has, and you work with Beacon to get connected to a provider. So as we talk about the mental health system for the county serving the severe, Beacon and Partnership serve our mild to moderate population within Mendocino County. They usually are referred to private providers or the federally qualified clinics. And then if you have private insurance or veterans insurance, and you're going through your private insurance company or the veterans services. So next I'd like to introduce our CEO, Carmel Andrews.
Well, good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We're very pleased to be able to bring this presentation here to Fort Bragg. As we know, we have a lot of services in Ukiah, and we do have services in Fort Bragg, but we're making a concerted effort to try to do more on the coast. So thank you for being here today. So I have the pleasure of introducing the speakers. But before I do that, I would like to note some of our partners and some of the people that have really helped us bring Stepping Up to you today. And yesterday, I think I forgot to mention that we are taping these events. We taped them in Ukiah yesterday, we're taping them today in Fort Bragg. And I want to thank Scott Spears particularly for all the work he did yesterday in setup and taping both sessions, and that he's here today. And today I also would like to thank Tony Rakes for covering for Scott, who's actually in Noises Up. Is that right? Did I say that right? Noises Off, and that's at Ukiah Players. Not to give a plug for Ukiah Players, but if you haven't seen Noises Off, I saw it the first weekend, and it actually is pretty funny. So if you're in Ukiah and you want something to do on a Friday or Saturday night, Ukiah Players. So also, this event is put on by the County of Mendocino Behavioral Health, and also from NAMI as our partner and collaborator with this. And so I particularly would like to thank Donna Muschetti for the work that she's done as chair of NAMI and assisting us, and also Jan McGordy. So between Donna and Jan, they have been instrumental in doing a lot of the outreach and the setup and really helping us and the planning for the Stepping Up event. So thank you both very much. Okay, so I think with that, let me go ahead and tell you a little bit about our speakers. We will be starting with Farah McDade Ting, and then our second speaker is Elizabeth Siggins. So let me tell you about Farah first. So Farah serves as the legislative representative for health and behavioral health with the California State Association of Counties. And for those of you that don't know, that's CSAC. And CSAC is our statewide organization for all 58 counties. They represent all 58 counties. And they are instrumental in helping us when we have issues. Like today, Farah got here right before 1 o'clock because she was at my office listening to Governor Newsom and the May revise, and actually beginning the analysis right there. And so Farah and I will actually be on a call here in about a half an hour with all 58 county CAOs, again, so that CSAC can tell us what the governor said and explain it a little more clearly. So anyway, so that's part of her job, but CSAC is instrumental and really assisting all 58 counties. Farah specializes in California health and behavioral health services that are administered by counties and have an impact on counties, and has done this since 2007. And prior to 2007, Farah served as a CSAC legislative analyst on a variety of issues, including employee relations, agriculture and natural resources, transportation and housing, and Indian gaming issues. She began her county career at CSAC in 2001, serving on the public affairs side of the organization as a communications analyst. And before coming to CSAC, Farah was an assistant editor at the California Journal, which is a nonpartisan government and politics-focused monthly magazine in Sacramento. Farah earned a bachelor's degree in government and journalism and graduated cum laude from California State University, Sacramento in 1999. She lives in Sacramento with her husband and 2 young children and actually enjoys traveling up and down the state, working for the counties and occasionally making a vacation out of it. Elizabeth Siggins is a consultant on a number of criminal justice reform initiatives in California, and she has worked in the criminal justice field for over 20 years in both government and community-based organizations. Elizabeth was the Director of Rehabilitative Programs at the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, where she oversaw the rehabilitative programs in over 30 state prisons, as well as the reentry programs for those being released from prison. Some of her current consulting projects include working with the Council of State Governments Justice Center on the National Stepping Up Initiative to reduce the number of people with mental illness in county jails. Also with the Chief Probation Officers of California on the Continuum of Care Reform, and with Californians for Safety and Justice on their Blueprint for Shared Safety. Elizabeth previously worked with the California State Senate and the Office of Inspector General. So we are very fortunate today to have Farah and Elizabeth with us. We had a great day yesterday in Ukiah, and I'm sure you'll enjoy the presentation. So please assist me in welcoming Farah.
Hi, I'm Farah McDade-King with the California State Association of Counties. I want to thank Carmel for that warm welcome, and the County of Mendocino for such a warm welcome, as well as Donna and the NAMI folks. We've been in town for almost 2 days now, and the hospitality and beauty of the county just is unmatched. So we're pleased to be here today, and I want to thank everybody, and thank everybody who is here in the room today to listen about this important topic. Elizabeth really is the expert on stepping up and what that means and how your county can implement it to have better outcomes for those who have a mental illness and may be involved or hopefully diverted from the criminal justice system. I work on mental health or behavioral health policy in Sacramento on behalf of California's 58 counties. And that can be a challenge because we have Mendocino County with all of its unique characteristics. We also have Los Angeles County, which is larger than most states as far as population. And then we have tiny Alpine County with about 1,000 people and falling. So finding the common interest of these different counties, different geography, different populations, and different interfaces with, of course, your cities in the county, if you have any cities in the county, some counties don't, with the federal government and other entities that you have to work with in your county. For behavioral health, we tend to focus in Sacramento, to the detriment, I think, sometimes, of just the policy and fiscal aspects of behavioral health. And while those are really critically important, especially the fiscal aspects, how it's implemented at the local level here in the county by you folks is really the most important part. Does it work for you? Is the funding flexible enough to meet the needs of Mendocino County? Those are the sort of questions that I try to remember in Sacramento, and is another reason why I love getting out of the bubble of Sacramento and coming to other areas to kind of see what's going on. I learned a lot yesterday, and you're about to learn a lot today on these topics. I did want to tell you that Governor Newsom did release his May revision budget today, and turns out that the state's doing quite well fiscally. They have a lot of money, which is just so weird to even say it. I've worked for counties for almost 20 years, and the habit is always a scarcity mindset. There's not enough funding, or it's not going to the right place, or we have these huge needs, and we've got to try to bring resources for counties to deal with it. And Governor Newsom today announced homeless funding, which he had announced in January, about $500 million. And he hadn't really specified where it would go, although there's the mayors of 13 of California's largest cities who have been lobbying really hard and saying, hey, we're the cities, we have the worst homeless problem, give all the money to us. And we've been saying as counties, we have a continuum of care not only do we have the behavioral health services and substance use disorder, we have all of our human services, CalWorks, CalFresh, SSI, SSP, those critical programs. We have housing authorities or housing programs that are critical for the homelessness issue. We have criminal justice, code enforcement, even animal control is a department that does deal with homelessness issues in your communities, and that's all county. Cities, they can build a shelter, but if they want to give those people any services, they got to call the county. So we've made that argument pretty strongly. We're gratified to see today Governor Newsom is proposing, frankly, a jaw-dropping amount of money, in my experience in the last 20 years, $275 million to go directly to counties for homelessness issues. Yeah, I still keep checking the number, like, is that a misprint? Now, alternately, he's also proposing the same amount, $275 million, to go to those 13 big cities that I talked about. So they had better do a good job, let me tell you. And so that's a big win for us. It's something we've been lobbying on very hard in Sacramento. But now's where the rubber meets the road. Now's where the legislature says, okay, counties, you're going to get all this funding. We want to make sure you use it in the way that we see fit. So we'll be talking about what sort of strings might be attached in the legislature. We always try to make funding as flexible as possible, so that's what we'll be working on. But the fact that the governor wants to dedicate funding to this issue really is a big win for us. We're really excited about it. And homelessness is just one aspect of where the intersection of behavioral health happens in counties. It is, the most recent kind of big, flashy issue the last couple of years. But of course, the criminal justice system, we'll be talking about that for the rest of the day. The child welfare services system, not only for families and parents that may be struggling, but also the children who perhaps have had traumatic events, and what sort of services can we give those children on the preventative side to make sure that when they grow up, they can be happy, healthy adults. So a lot of what counties do, a lot of roads in counties lead back to behavioral health, so it's a critical issue. And this emphasis in looking at mental illness and the impact on county law enforcement and how we can do better is really important. It's an issue that Mendocino County was one of the first counties in the state to sign on to the Stepping Up initiative. You heard from Janine the breadth and depth of the committee. The Stepping Up committee here at the county level has all the right people on it. And then by being here today, you're helping inform this process as well. So again, I want to thank you for having us in Mendocino County, and we hope you have a great day. Thanks.
Okay. So let me turn on some slides, and we'll just take a minute. So as you heard, my name is Elizabeth Siggins, and sorry, I think I'm going to need help again.
What would we do without him?
I know.
He's the best.
I was trying to be self-sufficient this morning. Oh, wait, still asleep. So again, my name is Elizabeth Siggins, and I work with the Council of State Governments Justice Center. I'll tell you in a moment a little bit more about that organization. And as Farrah mentioned, so what I'm going to try to do today is talk to you all about what the Stepping Up initiative is and the framework that it uses to try to tackle this issue and really focus on reducing the number of people with mental illness in the county jails. And then we actually have reserved time at the second part of this forum to really get some input from you all on that framework and what the next steps could look like in Mendocino County. So we actually may try to leave a little more time than we even have on the agenda, just because it's a nice sized group and we could actually really dig into some of that today. Before I go any further, so May is Mental Health Month, and so it is also then Step Up Action Month for Stepping Up. So if you are someone who uses social media, we use hashtag Step Up for Mental Health. and I'll remind you again at the end, but it'd be great to get out and promote that, and we certainly will be promoting the work that you all are doing here. This is really exciting to have what essentially has been 4 different events in 2 days, in 2 different locations in one county is pretty exciting for us. I don't think it's going on anywhere else in the state right now. So nice work, Mendocino County. So I told you I'll tell you a little bit about the CSG Justice Center. It is a national nonprofit organization. It's been around for several decades. And it is, the Justice Center is the criminal justice arm of the CSG Center. They actually work on many different issues and have really been focused for a number of years on this intersection of criminal justice and mental health. But they also do things like, if any of you have ever used the National Reentry Clearinghouse, CSG runs that. They have a few different technical assistance contracts with the federal government and provide technical assistance on a number of the federal funded grants, and are one of the lead partners in the Stepping Up initiative. So what we are going to do, we're going to start with just some background information on how did we get here and what do we know about this challenge of people with mental illness in jails. Then I'll describe some more about the Stepping Up initiative, talk very specifically about the framework that we use in the Stepping Up initiative, which is based around 6 specific questions. And then we'll talk about next steps in Mendocino County. We'll then have, I will finish, we'll have some speakers to really talk about lived experience, and then we'll do our group exercise, digging in a little bit more on next steps here. So, how we got here, this is not a new issue. This is something that state leaders and county leaders have been grappling with for quite a while. Back in 2002, the Judicial Council convened what they call the Consensus Project, with the idea that there's a consensus around the fact that we need to do something. This is not a political issue. In fact, I don't think I mentioned when I was talking about the CSG Justice Center, it's actually a fiercely bipartisan entity, and this has really been an issue that from the beginning we've been able to garner support and interest from people sort of regardless of political affiliation, regardless of role, and yet it continues and persists in being a very tough issue to actually deal with. One of the challenges that I think is really important to keep in mind, a lot of times when we're talking about criminal justice reform, we focus a lot on state prisons, but the reality is, in terms of numbers of lives impacted, far more lives are actually impacted by our county jails than just in terms of the number of people who actually walk through the jails. The numbers, as you can see here, are significantly higher, and just also in terms of the overall size of the population. And so the Stepping Up initiative does focus very specifically on county jails and realizes that that's the place where we need to address this issue. That doesn't mean that there aren't problems with the prison system. I did work there for a number of years. There's significant issues, but in terms of really trying to get at really trying to reduce this prevalence, we've decided to strategically focus on jails. It's not very easy to get good data. It's actually one of the things that I will talk about a few more times today, just because we really are trying to help people understand the importance of actually having the data. But based on a number of studies that have been done, the estimates are that of about 11 million people who are admitted to jail every year, about 2 million of them have serious mental illness. So we're not talking about a small problem. As I mentioned before, a lot of work has been done. This is just sort of to symbolize the growth in the mental health courts, and we've heard that there are 2 here in Mendocino County. The number of mental health courts have proliferated over the last couple of decades. That was really seen for a long time as kind of the solution, the way to address this issue. And so there's been a lot of effort and a lot of money that has gone into this. Despite all of that, though, we still find very much that our jails are our de facto mental health system. And it is a challenge up and down the state and all across the country. So, despite the fact that we don't have great data, as I mentioned, there have been a number of studies, and many of them have found consistent results. This slide is intended to illustrate that in lots of places we're actually seeing a decline in jail populations, but despite that decline, we may actually be seeing an increase in the number of people with mental illness. So that's what you can see there. The blue is the increase in the number of people with mental health, while we see the overall jail population going down. Important to keep in mind, we're not going to get into real specifics about this, but as you all continue to work on this issue and think through it, we don't all mean the same thing when we say mental illness. There is not just one definition, and so it can be really important, particularly on an effort like Stepping Up, which requires different system leaders to come together. So we're bringing both, the criminal justice field and the health field, community-based organizations. We may all have different understandings when we're talking about mental illness and even serious mental illness. So it can be really important to have that shared definition. We did, as part of the state Stepping Up statewide work, we pulled a number of representatives together last year and came up with a recommended definition to use, around a shared definition. And Tammy was talking, letting me know yesterday that similar work has been done here. And so there is an understanding now around a shared definition that can be really important. Those of you who work in the mental health field probably have a lot of experience with your public safety partners, expecting you to be able to handle something, and then you understand that this is not a serious mental illness, but to a lay person, for someone like me who did not grow up and is not trained in mental health, it's like, well, this seems like a mental health issue to me, so it can be really important and part of really bridging the cultural divide that exists in the different professions. So, despite the fact of not having the data, what we do know in general, because again and again we consistently find it, people with mental illness are definitely overrepresented in our jail populations. The estimates range somewhere kind of between 14 and 20%, depending on the studies, but that is generally what we find as compared to with the general population outside of the jail population, looking at about 4% of the population. As I'm sure it's not a surprise to you all, a significant portion of these individuals are also living with a co-occurring substance use disorder, and very likely many other challenges, homelessness, other chronic medical conditions. So not something that many of our systems are set up to traditionally handle, and pretty complex problems. So in addition to being more represented, overly represented in the jails, we also find repeatedly that people with mental illness end up having longer stays in jails. So this was a study out of New York City Department of Corrections, and you can see the length of stay being longer both for the pretrial population as well as for the sentenced population. And this is a specific example out of Salt Lake County, Utah, one of the counties that has been very engaged in the Stepping Up initiative as they really dug into their data and started to track this. What you can see is almost twice as long in terms of the length of stay in the jail for people with mental illness. And then as they started to calculate what that means in terms of costs, what they found was, they could, 122 bed days could be opened up just if they were able to just make the length of stay the same as it was for the population without mental illness. So longer lengths of stay and higher recidivism rates. So this study that was done by Jennifer Scheme from UC Berkeley, I think she was actually at UC Irvine still then, and others did a survey of people on probation with mental illness, and then they actually went back and they did really detailed interviews with people and file reviews. And they found that the rate of revocation, probation revocation, was higher for people living with mental illness than not. And we find, and again, for those of you who work in this profession, this may not be a surprise, but that for people who have living with mental illness, particularly those with co-occurring substance use disorder, their actual utilization of evidence-based programs, so those programs that we found repeatedly in research to be most effective, is pretty low. So remember the significant portion of people who have both the co-occurring disorder, and then we see here, only 12% of this population is actually receiving integrated substance use and mental health services. 34%, so over a third, are not even receiving any treatment, and about half are just getting mental health services alone. But this is of a population of the adults with both serious mental illness and a co-occurring substance use disorder. So this slide is really, I think, very important, and something that as we move forward and really try to develop strategies and approaches is something that we have to keep in mind. Many of us who have been focusing on this issue for a while have really jumped onto the bandwagon of we need to get people into mental health treatment. And we absolutely need to get people into mental health treatment, and we need to get them into the appropriate level of treatment. However, what this research, and there is now getting to be more and more research like this, is showing that for people who are in the criminal justice system with a mental illness, if we only address their mental illness, we may not find the kinds of results that we are hoping. In fact, we likely will not find the kinds of results that we're hoping to find. And a huge part of that is because their criminal behavior, their criminal activity may not be directly related to their mental illness, right? So in the criminal justice field, there's a growing body of literature and research that looks at what is it that is most directly related to people committing crimes. I'm going to jump to this slide. I'm going to come back to the other one in a minute. But what we see is, yes, there are things like housing, employment, family, substance use disorder. These four in the middle are actually the strongest drivers. And so that can be what we call criminal thinking, so attitudes, behaviors, peers, and different approaches like that. The most effective programs are those that get at that. You'll actually see on here that mental illness is not even considered a direct criminogenic factor. And part of that is because, as we saw back on this previous slide, really less than 10% of the time was the crime itself actually directly a result of the mental illness. So it can be really important that as we're thinking about addressing, reducing recidivism and reducing criminal justice involvement, we need to be addressing both mental illness as well as what might be anger management, might be other issues related to what's causing someone to fall into criminal behavior. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail right now, but just know that around this research, this is related to the criminogenic risk research. One of the things that has become very, very apparent is that if we focus our energy and our time and our services on people who are actually at low risk for recidivism, low risk to commit another crime, we can actually make them worse. Essentially, we can increase their likelihood of committing another crime. When we focus those same effective programs on people who are assessed as high risk or moderate risk, we actually see the kinds of reductions in recidivism that we want to see. So when I say it's important that we address the criminogenic needs, one of the first steps of that is making sure that we understand, are we talking about a higher risk person, or are we talking about a lower risk person? Because if we're talking about a lower risk person, we should not be getting them into the criminal justice programs or any of those programs. We should be getting them out. This is a model that may look a little complicated, but it's really important in terms of, or it can be very useful, I think, in terms of sort of understanding what I was just talking about and thinking about a way of triaging. So this is part of a report that's a behavioral health framework that came out in 2012. And what it is really based on is imagine a scenario in which we are effectively assessing risk of recidivism, we're effectively assessing substance use disorder, and we're effectively assessing mental illness. And then we're really getting people into the right area of programming, treatment, services, et cetera, that they need. So that people who are at low criminogenic risk, we are not getting them in the criminal justice system at all, we are getting them out. But that doesn't mean that they're then just not getting access to treatment, right? And one of the things, the unfortunate result of us having this de facto mental health system in our jails is that for a lot of people, that ends up being where they end up accessing treatment, right? So this model could help you, if you really had the ability to do the assessments at all of these levels, say, okay, so this person does not need treatment in the criminal justice system because they're low criminogenic risk, but they still are assessed for having a serious mental illness. So we need to be getting them services, just not in the criminal justice system, right? At the other end, we may have someone up here who is sort of at a higher risk in terms of criminogenic needs, but a low severity for mental illness, right? So we don't want to just be doing this one-size-fits-all approach and or kind of two funnels. You either are going to jail or you're not, you're getting treatment or you're not. The idea is let's really be able to understand, and once you break it down, it's actually not that complicated, and assessments exist, validated, strong, good assessments exist for each of these. Some of them in the public domain, don't have to be expensive. That doesn't, not to say it's easy to do this, but it's certainly doable and could really end up making for far more effective interventions. So all of that is really kind of leading us to this place where what we would ultimately then have is a system of care, not just a system of connections and kind of passing folks from one place to another, in which we're really in an integrated way addressing all of these needs at these various levels. So as I mentioned before, county's been working on this. Many of these pieces you all have probably been trying, other places have been trying. Why is it so hard to fix? So this is where the Stepping Up initiative came into place about 5 years ago. A number of organizations who had been working with counties across the country trying to do this. Why is this not, behavioral health supports are growing. We see more people doing, recognizing the importance of de-escalation training, different things like this. Why are we still having this problem? And so a few things came out of those discussions, and what it ended up being was the Stepping Up initiative, where the decision was, let's focus very, very specifically on reducing the number of people with mental illness in jails, right? Because when we talk about the intersection of criminal justice and behavioral health, there's so many different problems, right? We can go in so many different directions. There's many, many different aspects to this problem. But if we say our goal is that there will be fewer people with mental illness in jails tomorrow than there are today, what do we need to do to reduce that? And what we find when we do that is that it gets us to the decision-making points that, to change those things in the system that we need to be changing. So I just want to call out the various partners who are involved in this. At the national level, it's the CSG Justice Center, the organization that I work with, the American Psychiatric Association Foundation, and NACO, which is the National Association of Counties. Farrah works with the State Association of Counties. This is the national one. NAMI, as you can see, has been on the Stepping Up Steering Committee from the beginning as an integral partner, along with many other partners. So lots of people coming together to make this happen. So really, as I mentioned, what Stepping Up is, it's this whole different paradigm shift. It's moving away from sort of funding different pilot projects with the idea that, oh, this will be what makes the difference. This is the magic bullet we want. This is the solution. To really getting to this data-driven, integrated system approach in which we're actually identifying people with mental illness in the jails. We'll get to that in a moment. We're quantifying the problem. We know how big it is. And we can pinpoint strategies that are the gaps in your system here locally, and then track progress over time. Many California counties have stepped up. As you heard, Mendocino County was actually the first county in California to step up, which is very exciting. And we've done things like there was a statewide summit a number of years ago where Mendocino and 52 other counties had teams that came to start sharing practices and ideas, etc. So let me walk you through the framework, because that's what we're going to get into do a little bit more of later this afternoon. So there are 6 questions that we build this around. The first is your leadership committed? The second is, do you have timely screening and assessment? We'll go through some of these in a little more detail in a minute. Do you have baseline data? Do you actually even know what your prevalence is, what the problem is right now, so you'll know if it's getting better or worse? Have you done a comprehensive process analysis and inventory? And this is actually the step that we're going to play with a little bit later this afternoon to start strategizing and hearing from you all in terms of what currently exists and where some of the gaps are. And then from that, you prioritize the policies, the practices, and the funding that you still need, and then of course track progress. So seems simple, you know. Practice is always a little bit different. So, but in addition to those 6 questions, which is kind of the process to go through, this is the core of stepping up. So the core of stepping up is 4 measures. And when we talk about baseline data, we're talking about baseline data for these 4 measures. What we say is once you start identifying practices, you should say, which of these measures is it going to address? Because if it's actually not likely to affect one of these, then you might want to put it down lower on your to-do list. Because if what you care about is reducing the prevalence of people with mental illness in your jails, this is what you want to focus on and track. One is the number of people who are actually booked into jails with mental illness. But you can imagine many scenarios in which you actually might reduce that number, and you may end up with people not in better conditions, right? And so it is important that you're also looking at increasing their connection to treatment, right? We could close the door to jail or divert them out of jail, but if they're not getting to appropriate levels of care, then we haven't addressed our problem. So it's important to be looking at this. As we talked about, we also repeatedly find longer lengths of stay for people who have mental illnesses in jails. So we don't want to just reduce the number of people who are booked into jails, but we want to make sure that those who are booked in are not staying longer. And then ultimately, we could be affecting many of these, but if we're not effective in what we're doing, we might see recidivism rates not improving or even getting worse. And so it's important that we find a way to track all 4 of these measures, and then we really follow through and let this information guide the decision making. So I'll walk through those questions in a little more detail. So is your leadership committed? So you heard you have a county resolution, first county to actually have one. So the county elected officials have said, we care about this, we're going to make this a priority. You heard from Janine that there is a representative planning team, and they've demonstrated this commitment to this vision and practices. There, in terms of sort of having designated project coordinator and organized planning process, that committee meets regularly, and these are the kinds of things that they're actually probably going to be looking at, coming out of this is what do we need, who are we still missing, who do we need to have more representative from in our process, but lots of great work has gone into it, and everyone obviously needs to commit to accountability for results. There's not one way to do this stepping up leadership, and these are just some examples from across California in terms of counties, in terms of where it lives and who really ultimately ends up taking the lead. As you can see in Calaveras, it's actually the chief probation officer who has spearheaded this, and now, of course, he has to convene everyone and get them all to the table. But Chief Leach has been involved from the beginning, and so he really uses that community corrections partnership to be kind of the primary decision-making body. Very different in Orange County. It was really, it was the former sheriff. She's now retired, so we'll sort of see if the new sheriff steps up into that role, or if in fact it ends up being somebody else, but it was the sheriff and the supervisor, and that supervisor is actually now the DA. So we may see some shift in leadership, and hopefully if they did a good job with the planning committee, it won't all fall through the cracks, but that leadership having someone who's dedicated ends up mattering. As you can see from here, it doesn't necessarily matter which role it is, as long as there's somebody. Santa Clara, there's a supervisor and a judge. In Santa Barbara, it's the sheriff. He has long been an advocate around mental health and actually serves on some of the statewide bodies, and so he's really led the efforts there. And in Yolo County, it's County Behavioral Health. So it can be different, it can vary. One of the things that I really want to give Mendocino County credit for is a number of these counties, not all of them, but a number of them who have really kind of stepping up to a new level in California have done so because they've had some pretty horrible incidents happen that ended up being high profile and really got the attention of the elected leaders. And so I think Mendocino County is really to be commended for taking this from really day one. Jen and others who took this and really tried to call attention to it, not because there was political pressure to do so. So question number 2, do you have timely screening and assessment? The reason this is number 2 and is high up on the list is because you really can't do the rest of these unless we can get to this. And so ideally, what you want to see is screening and assessment for mental illness, substance use disorders, as well as recidivism. Because as I was talking before, to get someone most effectively kind of triaged, I'm sort of hijacking, I realize, a healthcare term for that, but to really most effectively get people into the right level of treatment, not just for mental health, but to address these other issues as well, you really need to be doing assessments in all of these areas. And that means doing both screening and assessment, right? It would just be too expensive, too prohibitive to do full-blown assessments in all of these areas. So people have developed screens so you can flag people and identify who is it that you should be doing the more full assessments on. But to that end, in many, many counties, what we find is, if they're doing like screening of everyone who's booked into jail, that's what we're talking about here. They might just be using a tool that they've had for a long time. They may be just doing kind of suicide risk. So it may not really be validated. You want to really get in and validate that tool and make sure that it is actually flagging people who really are more likely to have a serious mental health issue, and that you're not unnecessarily sending people for a full clinical assessment at too high of a rate, or even worse, right, missing a lot of people. So that becomes important. And then ultimately you want to get to a place where you're electronically collecting this data. One, because we want to get to a place where you can use it to be able to share and do some collaborative case management, but also because this is a data-driven initiative, it just is so time-consuming and cumbersome, even in smaller counties, to have to go in and hand manually track all of that. So we actually talked about this already in terms of knowing the prevalence. You'll have to have a common definition. I think you all have already kind of taken care of that here in Mendocino County, but it'll be important locally that people are using that and you're really all talking about the same thing, because particularly as you go forward in your tracking, you want to make sure that that you have that information. When we first started doing this work, every county reports open mental health cases to the Board of State and Community Corrections as part of the jail profile survey. And so we thought, oh, we could use that data to know what our prevalence is. And we went in and looked at it, and everybody's using different definitions. In some counties, you'll see the number go from like 20% one year to 70% the next year. So obviously they changed how they were counting, et cetera. So the state, this is not one of those areas where the state is going to tell people this is how you have to report it, but it would be great if people were using similar definitions so that we could use that for other kinds of planning purposes. We talked about the importance of both the screenings and assessments being validated, and the reporting results. I think I was looking at the sign-in sheet. Many of you in this room are in the health related fields, service-related fields, you probably know this difference between screening and assessments, but a lot of times when we go and we start talking to jails about this, this can seem a little bit intimidating. They're like, we can't do a full assessment of everyone who gets booked into jail. So really kind of understanding that that screen and assessment is different. We do not recommend specific screening tools, just because there are many out there and that's not our place to do that. But there are a number of them that are available and that are validated that don't require healthcare clinicians to do the screening. The one that Calaveras County is using and recently implemented in a universal way is actually done by the jail corrections intake staff. Now the assessment, that of course that's a clinical assessment, that needs to be done by a mental health professional. But if you have an effective screening tool, you're more likely to only be sending them to people who really legitimately need the full assessment. I'm not going to go into detail about the risk assessments, but we did talk about the fact that that can be really important, particularly if you have a significant number of lower risk people still in the jail. I know that most sheriff's departments across the state say they don't. But then when we go and we look, a lot of times there are for various reasons, and a lot of those times it can be related to mental illness, right? We tend to perceive people with mental illness as being at a higher risk than they are. And so particularly sometimes for people with mental illness, it can be important to also have that risk assessment information. So that we're not unnecessarily detaining people pre-trial, which also can then lead to those longer jail stays that we talked about. So this is kind of, if you can imagine, this place that we could get to. I would not be surprised if many assessments like this are already being done, where there's some kind of a mental health screen, there may be some kind of a risk assessment, and I'm sure probation does it for some folks, some kind of a drug screen being done, maybe a pretrial assessment, and then more fuller mental health assessments in the jail. But my guess is right now, some assessments are available to these people, these are available to this person, this one no one ever looks at, right? And so all of these different things are happening, but they're not necessarily being used for integrative collaborative planning practices or case management. And so what if we could get to a place where we do these very useful and helpful assessments, and then we actually use them in a helpful way, and we can share information, right? And be able to share what's necessary to be shared, what's appropriate and legal to be shared, and then use those for the various decision-making purposes that are tied to individuals, whether it's jail management practices, pretrial release, diversion ability, actually connecting to care, discharge, and community supervision, right? This could be very informative information for all these purposes, but chances are these folks are not all able to access all of this information. And so this is, what it could look like when you actually bring it all together. Okay, so question number 3, do you have baseline data? Super important. Remember, these are the 4 areas that we're talking about. So jail bookings, average length of stay, % of people actually connected to care, and then recidivism. Why is it so important? We talked about this, right? You may see one go up, but another one's going down, and so you need to know that, right? Just focusing on one of these areas might actually get you to some misleading sense of success. And we talked about sort of what our basic checklist is in terms of the baseline data, having system-wide shared definitions, electronically collecting it, actually having baseline data so that you know where you are now. Lots of counties have actually just started with doing either like a proxy analysis or something, a point in time, something, even if it's a manual count, just so that they can get their baseline now and be able to move forward as they work toward electronically being able to collect it. And then ultimately routine reports coming out, some entity being responsible for pulling it together. We asked last year for counties who wanted to commit to, we're going to make getting this baseline data and actually having an accessible process for collecting it on an ongoing basis. As you can see, Calaveras County was our one county in California. It was like, we want to do it, and they did it. So this is small rural. It is possible you do not need big city data systems to be able to do this. And they're really accessible also for folks who want to reach out and talk about ways they've approached different pieces of this. And then, so, the other thing is that in terms of understanding why this data is so important, why these measures are so important, because depending where you end up getting stuck, which numbers are not going in the direction that you want them to, that then might help you figure out, okay, here's what we need to be doing. So, let's say that you're seeing some improvements in some of these areas, but the percentage of people actually connected to care is still a real challenge. Well, that helps you then target in. Okay, well, so maybe what we have is a capacity issue, but maybe what we have is an access issue, right? So there maybe we have the capacity, but people are, for some reason, there's some barriers to access. Maybe we're not leveraging some of our funding streams as efficiently as possible, et cetera. So, as opposed to feeling like this is kind of too big of a problem, where do we even start? It can really help to narrow in your focus. Have you conducted comprehensive process analysis and service inventory? As I said, this is the piece that we're going to do a little bit with this afternoon, but it includes time and time again, we realize that people don't actually always know what is even available locally. And so that can be really important. And then it also can just be really important to bring people who work in different fields together to then identify those system gaps and challenges. We heard even yesterday someone saying, this is an asset, and someone's like, yes, except for it's not available, in this geographical area, or at this time of day, or at this, and so, no surprise. I worked in Sacramento for many years. Often the way we think things work is not always the way it actually works, and so that can be really, really helpful. And as I mentioned before, sometimes the challenges are in capacity. Just literally not having enough slots, beds. But sometimes it's a process problem, right? And it's not until you talk to people who are actually trying to use the service and access the service that you may find that out. Sometimes it may be that we don't understand the population that needs the service, whether that means culturally, whether that means geographically, whether that means diagnoses, right? Different, right? Really having better sense of who is it that needs it, and maybe we were wrong. Maybe we thought this was the need and the service is still really underutilized. It could be an issue with access, or it could be that we overestimated that need. And so doing that on a regular basis is important. And then that we're really making sure that these services, wherever possible, are actually based on the evidence and the research of what's most effective. This is an example of LA County's map that they did. And while it looks a little daunting, as I said yesterday, my sense is that you would probably end up with something probably just as complicated as you were walking through Mendocino County. What ends up happening from the time law enforcement is contacted, what are the various things that are available. We will not today go into this level of detail in terms of actually mapping out your whole system and the process, but it is something we definitely recommend. Counties use sequential intercept mapping, which is what this is based on, and I think this is kind of a more generic version of it, but that's not the only way, and sometimes some counties have done something more customized. This is a urban county in Texas, and this is Yolo County. They did this over the course of a couple of days, which is really what it takes. Again, you want to have all of your different partners at the table, right? Because guaranteed, no one individual knows how all the different processes work. They might know how they're supposed to work, but they won't know how they do work. And then this is really, maps from the time that the incident occurs to, did they go home? Did they go to the ER room? Were they booked into jail? Once in jail, were they actually arraigned, etc. So all of the different processes. And then what you do is as you're mapping this, you're flagging people saying, what if we could do something like this? Or here's where people fall through the cracks. Or here's the big challenge that we have. And you're sort of tracking those as you're going through the mapping. And it can be a really informative process and very helpful in terms of next steps of planning. From that, we then recommend that you prioritize your decision-making, your funding, your practices, etc. You all have a number of things that are already you heard, discharge coordinator in jail, some things like that that are super important that have come out of, and you all have had a stepping up steering committee for a number of years.
that have really kind of been able to identify, hey, here are some of our gaps, and here's what we need to be addressing. And so it just can be an important part of the process. This is an example of a California county and how they use this process. So just kind of one example, but they had their baseline data in the 4 different measures: admissions, length of stay, connection to treatment, and recidivism. And they decided, okay, for this year, our goal is going to be to reduce admissions by 10%. And so this is an example of one. I think there were a few strategies that they then identified. Okay, what is it that's going to make a difference with that, right? Because it's a big problem. We try to do it all. We don't do a good enough job. We kind of end up stretching ourselves too thin. Let's try to tackle this and see if we can make a difference. We'll set a goal of reducing admission by 10%, which meant 50 people on average. And so one of the gaps that they identified was, well, part of the problem we have is that we have CIT trained officers, but not available all the time. And so they actually went in and looked at what times of day, where are the gaps in services in which calls are coming in, but we don't have the CIT trained officers, crisis intervention training, so officers who are really trained in responding to calls related to someone with mental illness. And then they're like, so then they went through the process. Okay, so then here's our goal, here's what we would expect to see, and then tracked it, and ended up with figuring out, okay, here's the funding we would need, and had the result that they that they were hoping for. So I think it can be a great way of doing this sort of concerted planning. And so obviously we want to track the progress then in terms of what actually happens. So just a couple of ideas in terms of next steps in Mendocino County, and then as I said, we'll come back to this. So this is actually what we're going to do in a little bit. So I will we'll come back and explain it later, but we're going to look at these various stages. So even if you want to kind of get your wheels going about here's what I think, we're going to talk about assets what currently exists as well as the gaps that we would want to address. We're going to talk about prevention or intervention. So in the situation where we wouldn't even have to call law enforcement, right? This is a goal. When an incident does occur, so in terms of what's available in terms of responding, dispatch, things like that. Jail booking and services available in the jail. Forgot you gave me a nifty thing. Diversion and adjudication in terms of what diversion and sentencing options are actually available. And then post-release, how are people connected to treatment, what's available, and what are some of the gaps, challenges. And we're really going to think about, as we're doing this, policies, training, services, and outcomes in terms of, we see effectiveness with this, but not with that. So a lot of times we're, kind of accustomed to just thinking about what are the programs we need, but let's really think to the extent that we can about different policies, services, and training as well that could either be beneficial and or missing. Just so you all are aware, there are some resources. As I mentioned, we pulled this group together from different disciplines from counties across the state last year and came up with this model definition. So there's a document on the website that has that, if you're interested in that. There are a number of resources on the Stepping Up website, actually more than, if anyone's used them all, I'm amazed. But stepuptogether.org, and so there are a few different toolkits. There are toolkits for going through the 6 county questions. There are toolkits for different levels, right? So toolkits for the county leaders, for the facilitator, et cetera, for the project coordinator, different ways, different approaches. There's a county self-assessment. There's really specific information on mental health screening and assessments. There are actually webinars on each of the 6 questions that could be helpful, where you see county leaders from different counties across the country. So lots of different information. This is another resource where we pulled a different working group together last year to look at funding, because one of the problems that we find again and again is that funding will come out either at the federal level, the state level, because someone has decided that a certain pilot project is really great, and so they'll put up money for that, and then everyone wants to go establish that program. That may or may not be what you actually need locally, and so this has a number of different tools in the it's set up as kind of an Excel spreadsheet, and
It's based on the stepping up process, so it assumes, it sort of, assumes that you're kind of going through this deliberative process and doing the kinds of things like identifying this as the strategy we need. But then it lists many, many interventions that counties have identified and have wanted to do, and talks about different possible funding streams for that. So, and really talks about California-specific funding streams so that you can try, wherever possible, to reserve your most restricted funding for those things that, could only be used for that, and save some of your more flexible funding for things that you can't find anybody else to fund, right? And that's, we're not always as strategic with that as we can be, and so we end up not leveraging our funding as well as we can. So this is lessons learned and some very specific tools around that for those of you interested in that. And as I mentioned, this is Stepping Up Month of Action. So there's some resources, ideas, some Twitter, blurbs, some images that you can tweet and put out in terms of that. So we'd love to have you join us in the May Month of Action. These are activities that are set up for this Month of Action in terms of what we're suggesting county teams do. Love to see Mendocino out there. And that's it. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That was a lot of information, and we really appreciate you being here in Mendocino County to share with us. So I actually am going to ask Nami if we might go ahead and have you come up now, since we're a little ahead of schedule, and introduce Nami in Mendocino County. I think this is an amazing opportunity we have to actually hear all the data and information that Farah and Elizabeth had to share, what Janine shared about our system, and then really have Nami come and share with us real life experiences in Mendocino County. And I appreciated what Elizabeth had to say about often we think maybe people aren't in jail as long as they need to be. We have some felt desire to not want to attribute higher risk to people with mental illness, but we know that's what happens. I mean, we're wearing these green ribbons today because we want to see an end to stigma and to reduce stigma. And stigma happens because we're ignorant and we're biased and we don't always know the ignorance we have. But what I love about NAMI and the message of NAMI nationally and here in Mendocino County is that there's a real commitment and knowledge that recovery happens, that there's resiliency, that there's hope. And we heard from some of our consumers yesterday, really that story of hope and resiliency, and also some of the hard stories of what happens around stigma and biases as well. So I really appreciate Donna being here to share about what NAMI's doing in Mendocino County, both inland and their desires to serve here on the coast, and to introduce some of her fellow NAMI participants today. Donna Moschetti, President of Mendocino County.
Very good, you got my name right. Hi, so I'm Donna Moschetti. I'm chair of NAMI Mendocino County, which is your local affiliate of NAMI, which is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. First of all, I have to thank County Behavioral Health, Mental Health, Janine Miller, and especially Tammy Moss-Chandler in the beginning. We have an office now, which is huge. We've been in Mendocino County since 1992, and it took till 2018 to get an office. But we have one. It's in Ukiah, 564 South Doris Street, Suite E. If you're ever over there, please feel free to pop in. We have an extensive mental health library, media library, and we hope you take advantage of that. And maybe one of these days we'll have a satellite. Is that the right word? Yeah, satellite over here in Fort Bragg. But anyway, thank you. NAMI Mendocino offers family-to-family classes, which are classes for family members that go for 12 weeks, and we offer that once a year. Unfortunately, it's only in Ukiah right now. We're hoping to expand that. We have Family Support Group, which right now is held in Laytonville, Ukiah, and Fort Bragg. We have peer-to-peer which is for people who have a mental illness. It's a class exactly the same as Family to Family. We hold that over here in Fort Bragg and in Ukiah at least once a year. And we have Connections, which is a peer support group, which right now is being held in Fort Bragg and hopefully will be starting in Ukiah. So Fort Bragg is ahead of us. Thank you, Christina. Yes? So my story. Mine is my boy is my godson. His mother suffered from schizophrenia, actually when she was pregnant with him. She spent numerous years going back and forth in the jail system in the early to mid 90s, and unfortunately she committed suicide when he was 4. Everything fast forward, he was fine until the week between December 26th and December 30th of 2008, when he had his first schizophrenic break. His grandmother knew immediately what was wrong with him and tried to get help, and there was no help forthcoming back then. So in September 27th of 2009, he had his first encounter with law enforcement. He was arrested for resisting arrest and went to juvenile hall for 3 days. In October of the same year, of 2009, he was walking down the middle of the street and he was approached by a police officer and he got scared and he ran. It was a very ugly situation and it cost him 14 days in juvenile hall. Then in February of 2010, he was arrested for trespassing. And he spent another, I think it was 5 days in juvenile hall. And then in April, he was arrested on a parole violation and he spent 35 days in juvenile hall. So in 7 months, he spent 2 months in juvenile hall, 4 repeat trips, with no help forthcoming. When he finally was 5150'd or 5890'd, I never get the right term, because he was in there for 28 days. He went to Vallejo for 28 days. He ended up with an excellent psychiatrist who called in 2 other psychiatrists to put him on the right cocktail. He ended up on the right cocktail. He came home June 13th of 2010. My point in all of this is in 7 months, he spent 2 months in juvenile hall as a rotating door. He received help. He has great family support. His grandmother watches him like a clock. He has an excellent psychiatrist who has kept him, even though he's aged out of pediatric, that he trusts and that she trusts and that they can call 24/7. In 9 years, it'll be 9 years here in about a month or 2, actually, he has not had one single encounter with law enforcement. Not one. And that's the big difference. So that's my story. John, we have a local member, John Wexler. Would you like to come up and speak, please?
Thanks, Don. Thank you, Don. My name is John Wetzler. My wife and I are the parents of a seriously mentally ill adult daughter who suffers from the effects of paranoid schizophrenia since 2010. Our daughter is presently living in Napa State Psychiatric Hospital after multiple jailings, hospitalizations, panic attacks, criminal and misdemeanor behavior. She was incarcerated in Mendocino County Jail on December 21st, 2018 for a felony violation. During a related court appearance, Judge Brennan questioned our daughter's competence to stand trial and ordered psychiatric assessments by Dr. Kevin Kelly of Mendocino County, and then Dr. Katie Mazeral, Director of Conrep, Sonoma County, as she was going to be heading towards some form of state hospitalization. The results of these evaluations found that our daughter was incompetent to be able to stand trial. Our daughter was then remanded by Judge Brennan of Fort Bragg 10-mile court to the state psychiatric hospital system. Well, one may be ordered to the state hospital system, but before you get there, you may wait for a bed to open up. In this case, that wait took 125 days as my daughter languished in solitary confinement in Mendocino County Jail. December, January, February, March, April. Where does Judge Brennan think the defendant is during this time? In the state hospital? Are the judges aware of this lengthy and torturous wait? I think they probably are, as I've heard today. To make real what we know of our daughter's incarceration, there are a few stark realities. She was confined for 23 hours each day in concrete walls of a cell with a steel door, small glass panel, with one random hour between approximately midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., nightly for a release, for a shower, to attempt to collect call to us at home. No, not one day with sunlight or fresh air. When we visited, we brought in with her, she was brought in to see us in ankles. Her chains were in ankles and her hands were zip tied behind her back. This is for 125 days. These are just a couple of images to carry with you. When hearing this, the universal response has been, I would go crazy if I were in solitary. Can you imagine what this does to someone already ill and suffering panic attacks, hearing voices, with difficulty submitting to protocols? We are asking very compromised people to endure what would bring even healthy ones into crisis. Upon our daughter's release from the county jail and transport to Annapolis State Hospital, as a bed had opened up finally about a week and a half ago, she arrived there having lost 20% of her body weight during solitary confinement. Solitary confinement of the seriously mentally ill only traps them within their own echo chamber. No external feedback, no one to return the ping pong serve. For those of us living a free life, not encaged, communicating with our incarcerated daughter became more and more difficult during the 1 hour weekly allowed visits. Hard to comprehend the language and thought process of one so isolated from society, with her psychosis untreated and florid. She left the jail with her psychosis and her psychotic version of reality further cemented. Now she's at the state hospital where she will be treated as a psychiatric patient. Upon her arrival, she was overwhelmed by the blue sky, the blue of the sky, the green of the grass, and the aroma of fresh air. People were being kind to her, she said. While at the hospital, all criminality had been abated until the defendant is deemed restored to a level of competency to answer to her charges. She will then be returned to the same Mendocino County jail cell to await court dates to determine a suitable punishment for acts committed while suffering from a mental illness. The court may order a sentence of probation to ensure the patient remains street drug-free and obeying the doctor's orders, or she may be set free to roam the streets of the county, as the judge will consider time already served as adequate adjudication. She may be deemed a candidate for behavioral health court, where she will have some supervision to help her stay on the straight and narrow. She may become a candidate for Laura's Law. We can only hope that these services will be provided by Mendocino County and paid for by MHSA funds. Our daughter will need housing, SSI, restoration, and close observation from our outpatient services if she is to successfully return to society. In conclusion, it is clear, in spite of families and communities begging for help for their seriously mentally ill members, criminality is often the only road toward psychiatric treatment for the seriously mentally ill in this state. We need psychiatric bed facilities to be constructed and served throughout the state. In Mendocino County, we need to actualize the promise of Measure B, approved by 83% of our voters. Thank you, Mendocino County. As long as the jailhouse becomes an extended stop for the seriously mentally ill, success in treatment will be severely limited. It is important to remember that our daughter was not sentenced to 4 months in jail. She was ordered to the state hospital for restoration of competency to answer to her charges. The solitary confinement and non-specific open-ended incarceration was the actual byproduct of the lack of adequate hospital beds common to all Californians, not only citizens of Mendocino County. We need to exert a unified demand for humane, appropriate treatment that has a chance for restoration of competency and health for those suffering from mental illness. And then I've got a little addenda here I'd hope to have some more information about, but I have some information. I was concerned and did a search for records from the state regarding people who were in the same boat that my daughter was in. Just some of this quickly here in this addenda is that 90% of patients are forensic commitment, civilly or criminally mandated to the state hospital system. All have been accused through the criminal court of crimes linked to their mental illness. The remaining 10% are remanded as sexual offenders or civilly committed Landerman Petra Short 1-year commitments. Presently, there are 39.25 million people living in California. The incidence of seriously mentally ill, incapacitated by their disease, is 1 in 25 or 4%. I was glad to see 4% is correct. A lot of this stuff I did on my own, just searching through. Of the 39 million people, that 4% represents 1,570,000 seriously mentally ill people. There are 5 forensic existing state psychiatric hospitals in California: Napa, Los Angeles Metropolitan, Patton near San Bernardino, Atascadero in San Luis Obispo County, and Coalinga in San Joaquin Valley. Their bed total capacity is approximately 5,000 to 6,000 patients. So you can see there is an enormous disparity between the people who are suffering, the 1,570,000, to how many beds there are available. So the gap is 1,564,000 beds currently, that currently exists. This profound shortfall of beds affects the well-being of our entire society. We must stop the disinvestment of care for our mentally ill and demand a reversal to investment for facilities and providers. We need a more bright future. That's what I had to say, and along with my wife, who I appreciate very much. Thanks for helping me, Nan. I also have been contacted by friends, and I wanted to quickly read what they asked me to include in this. I'm here to put a face on this crisis. I have shared our family story with friends, with another friend's son. Was finally 5150 and then 5250, but released many days sooner than the psychiatric health facility, Respad in Red Bluff, was authorized to keep him. Within 2 days, this completely delusional, seriously mentally ill man was back in Mendocino County Jail, acting out during a court appearance, and where we now sit again and where he now sits again in solitary. We need to be he needs to be hospitalized, not jailed. We need SB 640, which will provide more grounds for 5150 and help get ill individuals off the street. However, the destination needs to be a hospital, not a jail cell. Another friend's son sat in solitary for more than 4 months, awaiting a bed in a Atascadero State Hospital. This crisis is statewide. I think that concludes my presentation. Thank you. There you go, Dan.
Good, all right.
Hi, my name is Jan McGordy. I'm currently chair of the Mendocino County Behavioral Health Advisory Board following John Wetzler, who served for many years and is really knowledgeable about all this stuff. Thank you, John. I don't want to go into my whole story today. I just want to talk about my son's experience with the jail, and my disclaimer is that this took place in 2012. So some things have changed. And I also want to mention that we had private insurance, and there's a big disparity between what's available in services between private insurance and those people who are Medi-Cal. When my son was a young adult, he had some setbacks in his life and was seeing a counselor in Santa Rosa. His behavior had become more and more erratic, and one day the counselor asked me if he'd had contact with law enforcement. I was very surprised. I thought, what has law enforcement got to do with this? Silly me, little did I know. My son was prescribed a variety of medications during this time, but eventually he stopped taking them. So just as an aside, psych meds can be very tricky. And people must weigh the cost, the benefit-cost ratio, if the side effects are very severe for compliance. So he stopped taking his meds, became increasingly violent, and we had to call 911. I must say we had good experience with the sheriff's department, with the deputies who came out. They talked to us first, and then they talked to my son, who at this time was not out of control. And they said they would take him to see a nice lady, which meant he was going on a 51 hold for a psychiatric assessment. In summary, he was hospitalized 3 times. We had to kick him off our property because of his behavior and refusal to be treated for his illness. He became homeless, but not for long, because he finally lay down in front of Safeway and wouldn't move, so he was booked into jail on some misdemeanor charge. The public defender took his case herself. Not too much later, he was released from jail, and right away I got a call from her. She said he had been released, he'd gotten his hands on some alcohol, and was rearrested at St. Mary's School. I was very puzzled because I knew he didn't have any money, and I knew there weren't any liquor stores near St. Mary's. So later, much later, I asked him about this, and he said behavioral health had picked him up and taken him to their office on Dora Street, and then they told him he could leave. Well, he didn't have a place to go. I told him that they thought he was drunk when they picked him up, and he asked if there was a breathalyzer test. Well, silly me, I hadn't thought of that. No, probably not. He said he was psychotic at the time and didn't know what to do. So you remember he was released without a plan or a place to go. So we went to the office of St. Mary's to ask for help. So he ended up in jail where he was incompetent, and he stayed for 6 months, which in days would be more than 180. I think he wins, right? He still refused to take his meds, even though I spoke to jail staff frequently and took his meds to them. He reportedly was provoking other prisoners, so he was placed in solitary confinement where he quickly decompensated. He lost a lot of weight because he wouldn't eat. He hallucinated that there were worms in the food, and generally refused to see me when I came to visit often because he didn't want to leave his cell. Finally, he became comatose. When he appeared in court, chained and dressed in orange, he was completely unkempt and laughed hysterically. The judge ordered meds, but they were not given. The judge ordered competency, but surprise, there were no beds in the state. Finally, he was given a court-ordered medication and had an immediate positive response. All charges were dropped after 6 months, and the judge asked him what he wanted to do. He asked for a hotel room, but behavioral health brought him to a homeless shelter here in Fort Bragg, even though he was concerned. He became med compliant with help. I had to call behavioral health here to get help, and he began a road to recovery. As a result of our experience, I've become a rabid advocate for mental health services, which are still pretty abysmal. I am very hopeful for the goals of the Stepping Up initiative for jail diversion. The process calls for collaboration across a broad array of public systems which currently act independently. Currently, each system has its own set of rules, written and unwritten, and its own data management system, but each is separate from the other, and there is little, if any, communication between them. This severely affects people's lives. When someone is suffering from mental illness, they're often traveling a quagmire of obstacles that ends in the prison system. So by default, with no other place to go, as has been said before, jails and prisons have become the new mental institutions. The only metaphor I can think of is like an automobile. If your car's not working, you take it into the shop and mechanics fix the part that has a problem. The transmission, the brakes, etc. This is like if someone has a certain ailment, like a heart attack or cancer. You go to your doctor, you go to the ER, and you see a specialist who addresses the problem. And the family and friends gather around to offer their thoughts and prayers and support. In contrast with mental illness, it's like taking that automobile into a shop where it is completely dismantled. The brakes may be fixed, but the tires are in the corner. The chassis is lying by itself in the middle of the floor, but the body is somewhere else. There is no way that car is going to move out of the shop on its own volition, even if all of the pieces are in working order separately. This is what it's like going to the emergency room for help with mental illness. Even though a hospital may claim its vision is to improve physical, mental, spiritual health and make care more accessible and affordable, they really do not want to see mental health patients. They can either send them to a psychiatric hospital, they can send them back out on the street, or they can go to jail. And family and friends shy away because this is really embarrassing. So to me, this is what the mental health system looks like. Surely there is a better way. Our society has become very compartmentalized, and we need to find a way to come together for the betterment of mankind. Nowhere is this more apparent than in treating mental illness. If people need help, they should be able to move seamlessly from one public agency to another in a coherent manner. All of these agencies are there to serve the public and society. They must be able to get medical help like any other disease. People suffering from mental illness must be diverted from the dead end of our default mental institutions, the prisons, and given a chance at life. Thank you.